These are the worst ways athletes have died while competing at the Olympics. Number 6. The 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics. The Olympics are supposed to be the ultimate celebration of human performance. The best athletes, the biggest stage, the safest possible conditions. Right? Well, not exactly. Because before the opening ceremony in Vancouver even started, one of the athletes was already dead. His name was Nodar Kushmaritashvili, a 21-year-old from Georgia, and he was there to compete in men's singles luge. If you've never seen the luge, it's where you lie flat on your back and shoot down an icy tunnel at highway speeds on what is basically a cafeteria tray. The event was held at the brand new $105 million Whistler Sliding Center, built to be, quote, the fastest ever. And this was one of those times someone should have asked if we should, not just if we could. Luge is supposed to be fast. The average sled goes around 80 miles per hour, but at Whistler, a track with 16 turns with names like Shiver, Luge Loop, and 50-50, they were pushing 95 miles per hour. That is about the length of a football field every 2 seconds. Blink and you just skipped 50 meters of ice, literally. During practice runs, athletes kept crashing, and some of them said it was too dangerous. The officials shrugged it off though. They said speeds were within acceptable limits, which should have been a red flag. Then came the morning of the opening ceremony and Nodar's final run. He launched cleanly and everything looked good. He was hitting his turns and he kept building up speed. 70, 80, 85 miles per hour. He entered turn 13, the track's most brutal section, clocking almost 90. Then, in less than a second, it all went wrong. He drifted a few inches too high on a curve, ricocheted off the wall, and was thrown off track, straight into a steel pole. His helmet shattered as his body absorbed the incredible force of the accident. The impact was like getting hit by a car going 60, except he was the one doing 60. Medics reached him in seconds, but there was nothing they could do. He was gone within minutes. Unfortunately, Nodar never got to see the opening ceremony, but the next story shows that you don't need insane speeds to die at the Olympics. Sometimes all it takes is a really bad idea. Number 5. The 1912 Stockholm Olympics. Okay, first of all, it's important to remember that in the early days of the Olympics, most athletes weren't professionals. They had day jobs, like teachers, farmers, mechanics, just regular people who trained in their spare time. So don't judge the next athlete too harshly for what you're about to see. Meet Francisco Lazaro, a 21-year-old runner from Portugal, a mild-mannered carpenter by day, and a national marathon champion, also by day just on his days off. The marathon that year was brutally hot, around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and there was pretty much no shade for the nearly 25-mile course made up of dirt and cobblestone roads. But Francisco had a plan. A very bad plan, but a plan nonetheless. To protect himself from the heat, Francisco did the most logical thing possible. He coated his entire body in a thick layer of wax and fat. Why, do you ask? Well, to prevent him from getting sunburn. And to help him, quote, conserve energy somehow. When someone asked if that was a good idea, he supposedly replied, "Either I win or I die." And, well, you saw the title of the video. The race started just before noon, and at first Francisco stayed with the lead group, glistening like a beautiful rotisserie chicken, and for a while it seemed like this plan had worked. Until it didn't. The problem with coating yourself in something that stops anything from getting into your skin is it also stops anything from getting out, like sweat. Sweating is how your body regulates temperature. As sweat evaporates, it carries heat away from your skin, cooling you down. But if you can't sweat, because you're, say, coated in wax and fat, your body temperature climbs fast, your blood thickens, your heart works harder, and eventually your organs start cooking themselves from the inside out. Once again, like a rotisserie chicken. Every hour, an endurance athlete will sweat out anywhere from 1/2 to 3 liters or more. So running in that heat and unable to sweat, Francisco was in big trouble. By mile 19, Francisco was stumbling and mumbling nonsense. A few minutes later, he collapsed by the side of the road. He was carried off unconscious and died the next morning from severe dehydration and heat stroke. Doctors recorded his body temperature at 107 degrees Fahrenheit and said the wax had literally baked onto his skin. Some blamed his training, while one official said he just ran too fast. But the truth is that he had cooked himself to death. Francisco Lazaro became the first athlete in Olympic history to die during competition. Nearly 50 years later, though, they were still inventing new and exciting ways to die during competition. Number 4. The 1960 Rome Olympics. The day of the 100-kilometer team time trial in Rome was even hotter than the day Francisco Lazaro died. It was 104 degrees Fahrenheit, not a cloud in the sky, and the Danish team was about to hit their breaking point. After the first lap, Jørgen Jorgensen, a man with the most Danish name in history, dropped out from sunstroke. That meant the remaining 3 cyclists, which included 23-year-old Knut Enemark Jensen, had to finish the race by themselves or the team would be disqualified. So they kept going. Flashback to before the race though, where the team's coach had handed out what he called energy tablets. But these weren't electrolytes, they were amphetamines mixed with roniacol, a drug used to dilate blood vessels and improve circulation that were, in the coach's defense, technically legal at the time, but legal doesn't always mean smart. The problem is amphetamines don't make you stronger, they just trick your brain into thinking you're not dying. They dull pain, mask fatigue, and make you feel unstoppable, right up until your body stops. And that's exactly what happened to Jensen. By the halfway mark, witnesses said he was pale, drenched in sweat, and mumbling that he couldn't see straight. But with their 4th man out, the team needed him, so he kept going. Then around the 66-kilometer mark, his body gave out. He collapsed, hit the pavement, fractured his skull, and never got back up. He died later that day, and the official cause was heat stroke and head trauma, but the autopsy revealed the true culprit, the pills. While the heat had raised his core temperature past 107 degrees Fahrenheit, thanks to the drugs, his brain kept telling his body that everything was fine, to keep pushing, and he rode himself to death. Jensen's death became one of the first Olympic doping scandals, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. And 4 years later in Tokyo, the first Olympic anti-doping rules were introduced. But that same year, while they were trying to crack down on drugs, the Winter Games in Austria were having a very different kind of problem. Because before the opening ceremony even began, 2 athletes were already dead. Number 3. The 1964 Innsbruck Winter Olympics. Let's start with the first. Ross Milne was a 19-year-old skier from Australia who had come to Innsbruck to compete in the men's downhill. During a practice run on one of the steepest parts of the Patschikoffel course, Ross lost control and slammed into a tree at roughly 60 miles per hour. Open and shut case, right? Just a kid from the outback on the wrong continent going too fast. Well, not so fast. Witnesses said the course was totally mismanaged and way too crowded to be practicing on. There were over 100 skiers on it at once, people standing in the middle of turns and some literally walking across the track. One racer called it a slaughter waiting to happen, so maybe it wasn't Ross's inexperience at all. Then, as if to prove him right, tragedy struck again the very next day. Kazimierz Skrzydłowski, a British luge competitor and one of the sport's early pioneers, took a practice run on the brand new Olympic track. As you already saw, luge is dangerous, but it was even worse in the 60s. Helmets weren't required, safety walls were low, and the sleds steered like shopping carts on ice. It's hardly a surprise then that Kazimierz lost control in the middle of one of his runs, flew out of the sled and hit a support post headfirst. He died from massive internal injuries and became a pioneer in the sport in a much darker way. The first athlete in Olympic history to die in a luge accident. 2 athletes, 2 different sports, both dead before the opening ceremony. And yet, this wouldn't even end up being the most deadly Olympics. We'll get to that one in a minute. First, number 2, the 1992 Albertville Winter Olympics. By the 90s, you would think the Olympics would have learned their lesson: safer equipment, better rules, fewer random things on tracks. But no! 1992 was supposed to mark a new era of winter sports, sleeker, faster, more modern, and also just as deadly. Nicolas Bocate was a 27-year-old speed skier from Switzerland. Speed skiing was making its Olympic debut, and Nicolas had a real shot at gold. First of all, speed skiing is absolutely nuts. They regularly hit speeds of over 120 miles per hour. The morning before his event, Nicolas was doing a warm-up run on what he thought was a closed section of the mountain. The problem? It wasn't. At the same time Nicolas was heading down, a snowcat, one of those huge machines with tank tracks that they use to smooth and pack down the snow, was driving up the slope. And even though it weighs over 10 tons, Nicolas never saw it coming. Just as he was coming over a small rise, he hit the snowcat head-on at full speed. The impact was catastrophic, like driving a motorcycle into a parked truck on the highway at full speed. Officials called it a freak accident, and technically it was. But it also showed how chaotic and unregulated training conditions were. No coordination, no strict closures, and apparently no one thought to tell the 10-ton vehicle there were Olympians skiing down the same mountain. Considering what happened at Innsbruck 30 years earlier, it was like déjà vu. But as we said, there is an even deadlier Olympics to come, the deadliest of all time. Number 1. The 1972 Munich Olympics. Everything we've talked about so far has been an accident in one way or another. Tragic, preventable, but accidental. Munich was something else entirely, because this time it wasn't physics or negligence that killed the athletes, it was politics. On September 5, 1972, at around 4:30 a.m., 8 members of a Palestinian militant group called Black September climbed the fence of the Olympic Village. They were armed with AK-47s, grenades, and a plan to take Israeli athletes hostage. Security at the Games was almost non-existent since the organizers wanted to get away from the hyper-militarized image of Nazi Germany's 1936 Berlin Games. That meant there were essentially no guards or security checkpoints anywhere. One of the terrorists was literally helped over the fence by an athlete who thought that they were another Olympian just coming back after a party. Once they were in the Olympic Village, within minutes, they had broken into the Israeli team's apartments. Wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg and weightlifter Yosef Romano fought back and were killed almost immediately. The rest were taken hostage. For the next 24 hours, the standoff played out on live television, the first global act of terrorism broadcast in real time. The terrorists demanded the release of 234 prisoners held in Israel and Germany, and negotiations dragged on. That night, German police attempted a rescue at a nearby airbase called Fürstenfeldbruck. The police were undertrained, under-equipped, and had no communication plan. Some officers didn't even have radios, snipers were positioned without scopes. The entire thing was a disaster before it began. Then, when the shooting started, it turned into an even bigger mess. In the end, all 9 remaining Israeli hostages were killed. Some shot, others when a grenade was thrown into a helicopter where they were being held. A German police officer and 5 of the 8 attackers also died. In total, 11 members of the Israeli Olympic team, a mix of athletes, coaches, and support staff, were killed. It was the darkest day in Olympic history, and in response, the Games were suspended for 34 hours. Now, if you want to get a gold medal from us, make sure to subscribe, and then go watch the most brutal death in history, the Jacob's Well diving tragedy, or try this other video instead.